Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us and spending your Thursday night with us. My name is Drew Beasley, and I'm the USA Gap Year Fair's Outreach and Events Coordinator. Like I said, I want to extend a huge thank you all to coming on and hearing a little bit from myself and from Holly. A little bit about who is speaking at you. I'm both a Gap Year alum and an experiential program leader myself. As you can see from some of these pictures, I've had fantastic opportunities to volunteer across South America, lead treks across national parks, and teach English in Prague. And all of those opportunities stemmed from my gap year. I got to witness tremendous growth within myself during my gap time, as well as tremendous growth in others that I've worked with as a gap year professional. So believe me when I say that I'm so excited for you all to join us tonight and begin planning your gap year journey. So before we get started though, I did want to mention that this event to you tonight is brought to you by Go Overseas, and more specifically, the USA Gap Year Fairs. You can think of Go Overseas as Yelp, but for meaningful travel programs. Go Overseas is a community-centered resource for all different types of travel experiences. And you can visit Go Overseas to read alumni reviews, learn about programs, browse articles and guides, and learn about scholarship opportunities, including the $5,000 Gap Year Scholarship that opens February 1st. Keep an eye out for that email announcement coming very soon. So if you find today's session to be particularly helpful, you're in luck, because we have no shortage of resources to help you continue your gap year exploration. In the chat, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to some of the resources that I'm about to mention now. So the first one on there, Go Overseas, which I've already mentioned. Beyond that, we have our digital guide. You can think of the digital guide as a virtual catalog that you can use to familiarize yourself with some of the most fantastic gap year program providers working today to bring you fantastic experiences. You can get to know programs at a glance just by their location, program offerings, and emphasis. Next up, if all of these programs are making your head spin, I'd recommend you start with our Gap Matcher. This customizable quiz can help you find your top programs to consider based on your interests. All you have to do is tell the Gap Matcher a little bit about what you're thinking of for your gap time, where you are in the process, and it will give you programs to do the rest. And finally is our USA Gap Year Fairs, which are coming to 30 communities around the United States. If any of these upcoming events are near you, we highly recommend that you sign up and join dozens of gap year programs to continue the conversation. But if any of these are not too close for you, you can also attend one of many of our virtual gap year sessions. Well, as we're so excited to have Holly here today to talk about gap year planning and Gap Year 101, we also have a series of gap year program exploration events where you can hear about program providers who offer all sorts of different programs in the following fields. So without any further ado, I'm so excited to introduce you all to Holly Bull. Holly has been counseling students and adults through the gap year process for more than 30 years and has placed over 3,000 individuals in programs. Holly, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Drew. And good evening, everyone. You can put it to the next slide, Drew, thank you. So as Drew said, I'm a gap year counselor. All I do is gap year counseling. And my company, the Center for Interim Programs, was the first organization of its kind in the United States. Nobody was really talking gap year in 1980, when we started this company. And my father, who was a teacher and a headmaster for many years, both in the US and abroad, he always saw a need for something like this. And he was collecting program ideas, back in the 60s, and just kind of tossed them into a shoebox for about 20 years. And then he started interim here in Princeton, New Jersey in 1980. And that's actually when I was graduating from high school. So I took a gap year myself before college. I took a gap year after my sophomore year. And I have two daughters, a stepdaughter who took a gap year, a daughter who just took her gap year. And we've just worked with so many students since we started. At this point, we have over 8,700, probably more alumni whom we've just helped sort of midwife through this process. And just a huge database of program options that we're vetting all the time. So I'm speaking today from all this experience, from just kind of being in the trenches, working with students day in and day out. We actually work with all ages, but mostly with students. Usually the parents are ready to go. Okay, so next slide. Yeah, so again, as I said, I've been doing this a long time. The picture there is of me on my first gap year when I went to Hawaii to check out marine biology. So I was doing aquaculture research on Oahu at 17, working with scientists, and I lived with family friends whom I didn't know before I went. And it was just really helpful, A, to take a break from formal academics, and then B, to just stick my toe in the water, sort of literally in this field of interest that I thought I might want to major in college. And after a month or so, scrubbing out trim tanks and chatting with scientists, like getting a good sense of the daily do of the research, I realized that I probably didn't have the patience for that kind of work. So that was great to know, like tick that one off before heading off to college. And then in the spring, I went on an academic cultural study program in Greece and just fell in love with the language and learning the language and the culture, and took all that excitement into college. And then the second gap year I took after my sophomore year, these are the times when people most typically take gap time, like between high school and college, and often breaks from college. But I went to India and Nepal, I went back to Greece, I did service work in Appalachia and Kentucky, and then finished up with a major in anthropology and started working in this field pretty much right out of college. So I ran the US office for the program in Greece that I had attended, and then was working with my father in the gap year counseling. And, at this point, just from having also watched my own daughter go through the process this past year, like up close and personal through the pandemic years, the effects of the pandemic on these students, and just listening to how she sounded, was really interesting to watch her go through the process. And she was concerned about being old in college. She said, "I'm so glad I took that time." It was much easier to make friends, people with a common interest, just a break from all the stuff coming at her, and took time to socialize in a more normal way too. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So most people know what a gap year is these days. I wouldn't call it mainstream in the US yet, but there's way more awareness and support now. The way I describe it is just this chance to explore interests and skills, but with intentionality. You're not just taking a year off or time off. You're really thinking creatively about, okay, what are my interests and how can I get at these interests and pick them off systematically one by one. Typically it is between high school and college. That's the natural break. I would be hard pressed to give up either of my two gap years, but if I had to, I think the break in between high school and college is a better one, because it doesn't break up your college years as much with your social life and so forth and what you're into in college. Generally, it's about 3 to 9 months. It's called a gap year. It probably should be called gap time because you don't have to take a year. And this is very much a year on. People say, "Oh, I'm just taking the time off," or, "Oh, you're taking a break." And, this could be some of the most important time you take in terms of pivoting you towards something you love or away from something you don't, and all the skills that you're garnering in the process. Next slide, please. So who takes a gap year? Anybody who's interested. It's all different ages, all different types of learning styles, and you don't have to be good at anything, no experience. Now you could be terrible at something, who cares? It's all for learning. And I think that gives students tremendous freedom to go and explore because the pressure is off. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this is really important for me as a counselor. This is why I love this work, because it's often the first time students especially are shifting away from reacting to all these directives coming at them. We're put in school at 5 or 6, we're expected to go to college. It's like, I have to do this, I'm supposed to do that, what will people think? And you're living from the outside in. And with gap time, ideally, you're just shifting that around and you are leading from the core outward. Who am I? What am I interested in? And then I choose and own what I'm up to for a nice chunk of time. And in this year, you're practicing what it feels like to choose and create your life. And that for me is personal power. If you can get a beat on that at 17 or 18 or 19, you're way ahead of a lot of older adults who really haven't gotten a sense of that, or are busy doing the oughts and the shoulds and living from the outside in, which is kind of a hollow existence. So I think this is really key. And in that regard, it almost matters less what people do than the fact that they're choosing what they're doing. Now, having said that, obviously there are better options than others, but as much as possible, students lead from the core. Next slide, please. So lots of benefits here. If you're leading from the core towards something you want to do, obviously you're going to be more motivated right away. So you're feeling what it's like to pick up that kind of proactive energy. Many of the students with whom I work, and these are all different kinds of students, a lot of them by senior year seem kind of fried. Even if they're good students and like school, I look at students sometimes, I think, wow, it takes a lot to knock the vitality out of an 18-year-old. And that's kind of what I'm seeing. People like, ugh. So having time to just rest and rejuvenate beyond just a summer is really helpful. And then you hit college, if you're heading on to college, with a lot of energy. Also getting a sense of all this, material that you've been cramming into your head all these years, because that's what we do in school. How does it relate to the world around you? That for me was a big deal by senior year. It's like, okay, I go from math class to history to Spanish. How does this stuff connect, and how is it relevant? So once I started getting a sense of relevance, here's marine bio in action. Oh, here's a language that I'm studying and I can actually chat with people when I walk out the door. That was a revelation, and that got me excited about learning again for its own sake. Students are also more likely to start paying attention to budgeting, because in college, it's kind of laid out for you. You may not be thinking about that as much, but if you are given a budget, by your family, or parents can sit down and say, hey, here's what we can comfortably or willing to put towards your gap year, the student then starts to think about the budgeting. And that's a great skill. When my daughter Leah took her gap year last year, she had to pay for all the airfare during her year, which is what I had to pay for. I figured that's reasonable. And she was really careful when she was traveling for a month last May around Europe. Like she took 3 flights to get places because it was cheaper because she was budgeting. So she was really keen about that. Also on a practical level, everything you do during gap time is going to go on a resume. And that's the front loading of skills that I talked about earlier. These are skills that are probably going to be more useful in the work world post-college than many classes. And it's also often a missing piece for many students who are graduating with a major and they still don't have a clue as to who they are, what they want to get at. And they're missing some of these really key, like wider range of skills that people draw on later. I just read a Harvard article and they talked about the importance of social skills, team building skills. All of these things are what students are getting during gap time, big time. And then if you can hit college or a career with more clarity about what you want to do maybe, or what you don't want to do, or somewhere in between, that is going to make you a more efficient student. And also, I think that clarity really can help you get the job. So these are really down the line benefits. How you transition into college is easier. You're not as run by the mob. And then how you move from college to the work world. My stepdaughter, Samantha, when she took her gap year at 19, she did an internship in Dublin, Ireland. And she said, I'm pretty sure I got my job with IBM right out of college based on that internship I did in my gap year. She said, we only talked about that during my interview. And IBM told her, Samantha, you got this job because of your gap year. She was a good student. She did, good school. But employers are really looking for people who can show up and do the work. And when you show up with a sense of self and self-confidence and more in the world skills, that's going to stand out, in a job interview down the line. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Drew. So how do these gap year students perform in college? Okay, so the myth still is that these students, if they take gap time, they're going to lose academic momentum. If they step away from formal studies, they're going to forget how to learn, or maybe it's going to derail them from going on to college if they were planning to go to college. But the reality is, on average, these students are performing at higher levels on a GPA level than non-gap year students. And the next slide will show you Bob Clagett's research. This is older data. Bob was in Harvard admissions for years and then Dean of Admission at Middlebury College for about 7 years. So at the bottom, you can see it's 2011 to 2014 data, but it mirrors more recent data where they're seeing that the gap year students' GPAs in blue are outperforming the non-gap year students' GPAs in red. And this is what Bob saw, that several percentage points higher than their peers, these gappers. And he was accounting for their academic standing, their academic background coming in. So he was looking at lots of different elements. And it was really clear that these students basically were better students on every level. And most of them hadn't done anything academic for a full year. The other thing he noticed at Middlebury is that the FEB admits, people who hadn't chosen to take gap time, for a fall semester, they were offered the later admission at Middlebury. He said a disproportionate number of those students were walking away with all the leadership awards at Middlebury. It's like, what's happening in 3 months that's affecting that kind of a change in those students? And I put it to it's all of these benefits I'm talking about when students had to think more proactively, what do I do with my fall? before I go to college in February, that proactive energy they were taking into Middlebury, and it made a difference. The next slide is the data that Bob crunched for UNC Chapel Hill. Same results, even more dramatic. The light blue are the GPAs of the gap year students compared to their peers. And then the next slide is Mark Hatch at Colorado College. And I was on a NACAC gap year panel with Mark, talking to lots of admissions people and high school counselors and so forth. This was over 5 years ago. And this is what Mark was saying. Mark was also in Harvard admissions. He's still in admission at Colorado College, that the GPAs were higher of these gap year students. Young men were outperforming non-gap year female peers, the gap year men, and they were way outperforming non-gap year male peers, which is, statistically unusual that these young men were doing better than the young women. And the students were leaders on campus. They had fewer behavioral issues and dramas, roommate issues or excessive partying or whatever can derail students often freshman year. These students basically hit the ground running and were really good students. And they finished college in 4 years or fewer. So they're clear going in. I don't know if you know this, but the average number of years for people to finish college is often 5 or 6. Why? Because they're changing majors, they're changing schools, they're trying to figure out where their passions are through more classes. And I put it to you, the classroom doesn't necessarily give you that information, but gap time can. So he said, we want to see 20% of the incoming freshman class have taken a gap year. I think they're beyond the 12% now, I haven't checked recently. The other thing that Colorado College has been doing lately, because they are now a research hub for gap year, is looking at levels of anxiety and depression going down in gap year students, and lower numbers of, decreased number of disciplinary incidents. Again, just the maturity and the pressure taking off these students to just kind of like fill back up and then land more soundly. The other thing that Mark said, by the way, which I thought was unusual at the time, he said, if you're applying to Colorado College, tell us you've done a gap year or you're planning to take one. It will help you get in. He said, on every level, you're a better student for us. You make us look good. In most colleges, you just want to apply and get in and ask for a deferral. But Colorado College, you definitely want to tell them. Okay, next slide, please. So remember I said, if you spend, on average 5 or 6 years finishing college versus 4 as an efficient gapper, it could be quite a considerable savings. Public colleges or private colleges at the bottom here, $30,000, $76,000 you might save just spending less time in school. And the way that colleges cost now, ideally you really want to be an efficient student. And by the way, you do not have to spend anywhere near the money at the bottom there on a gap year. You could do nothing but room and board placements, housing and food in exchange for labor during a gap year, and still get the same benefits that I've been talking about in terms of how you take on college. Okay, next slide, please. These are some of the universities that actually run programs, gap year programs. So Princeton University has been running the Bridge Year program for a number of years. You have to get into Princeton and then you apply for the Bridge Year program, and they have roughly 42 students go and do almost like a Peace Corps program abroad for a year, and then they start at Princeton, and Princeton helps fund it. Tufts has a 1+4 program, community service work abroad or in the US, and I think they have some funding for that. UNC Chapel Hill has a fellowship that provides money for a small group of gappers every year. And then Florida State University has also these awards, and Duke is the most recent one. These shut down during the pandemic, but I believe they're coming back on board now that people can go and travel again. So most of the funding is coming from alumni donors, just inspiring these colleges to create these programs. This does not mean that other universities don't support gap year. There's I would say very few universities don't realize that gap year students are probably going to be better to have as freshmen. Okay, next slide, please. So here's what you want to pay attention to, just watch out for. I mean, ideally, you don't want to force a gap year on someone. That kind of belies the whole power of choosing and owning. But, when I have a parent drag their child into my office, I'm really clear. It's like, you know what, you've got to want to do this. And I tell the parents, it's not going to work if you force it. What I often see with students is they don't realize what they can do. So often they'll turn toward it. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that this is what was involved and how it's tailored to my interests. So that's different, that students will suddenly be inspired to look at it in a different way, and also just to allay their fears that they have about it. The other thing is there are some programs that are duds, so you want to do your due diligence and check programs out. You don't want to land in something that's not well organized or is not safe enough. It's nice to be as safe as you can be in this world. And then the year as a whole, because often people are doing more than one thing during the year, you want to put some thought into it, because there's lots of moving parts here, and you don't want too many gaps during your gap year. So it does take work. It is not as traditional path that you might need more support and guidance. It's normal that students are changing and then plans are changing. So I have students in the fall now come back and their winter to spring plans have completely taken a different tack. Totally normal. But you want to make sure you have sort of backup plans in place for that. And then just to consider what the budget is like. What's my budget? What do parents want to put toward this? How much can the student chip in? And then looking at the range of costs. And I'll talk about that because there are ways with scholarships for people to get to the larger group programs, as well as look at the low cost options. Next slide, thanks, Drew. All right, so here's what I hear from students. I don't want to get behind my high school class. Or what's it going to be like when I land in college? Am I going to be too old as a freshman? So my daughter was a year older anyway. She said, I'm going to be ancient if I take a gap year and start college. That was her main concern. And I said, you're going to be more mature, but you're not so age bound in college, so it doesn't matter so much. And you can still connect in with peers during a gap year. So, for students who are worried about getting behind, typically when you step into gap time, you're connecting with people who normally be in college that year, but they just happen to be going the following year. So you don't have to disconnect from the peer group. And not that this is competition, but gap year students are, even if they graduate a year later than their peers, are so far ahead in terms of those skills that they're garnering that I was talking about, those front-loaded skills. And that's going to help them right on through. Okay, next slide, please. So when I break options down into categories, there are 4 main categories I separate them into. At the gap year fairs, you'll see a lot of the facilitated group programs that show up at the fairs. So these are specifically set up for gap year students, lots of structure and support. They can run, 2 to 3 months at a time. Some are full year programs, although those weren't running as much during the pandemic years. And these can really vary from cultural study placements, like 2 or 3 months with 10 or 12 peers and leaders moving around Central South America, homestays, service projects, adventure travel, sightseeing, or Southeast Asia, or Fiji, New Zealand, Australia, or Europe. Or it might be something that's really focused on art history or studio art, or maybe it's marine related studies or outdoor adventure. So my daughter Leah, who loves hiking and backpacking, did 3 months in the fall of her gap year, just outdoors with peers, away from her phone quite a bit, just hiking and backpacking and hurling herself off cliffs safely, and said it was mentally relaxing, physically challenging, and she loved it. So you're paying the most for these. They can run 14, 17,000 a semester or so. Many of them have scholarships. So if you're on a really tight budget, ask for help. I know there were 2 programs I met with recently, and they said we had scholarship money left over. So people weren't actually following up. So they were looking for scholarship students. Okay, the next category of program type are what I call the skill-based intensive. So these are shorter, 1 to 4 weeks, say. And these provide you with housing, fellow students, range of ages, but a common interest, and to get some kind of a training. So it could be, hey, I want to go and learn how to teach skiing or snowboarding or yoga, or I want to build a guitar, or I want to get my wilderness EMT training, 4 weeks medical training, or do a cooking intensive, learn how to run a recording studio, or maybe I want to go do filmmaking or writing intensive. So these can be tucked into gap time now and down the line. I mean, I always tell students, you've got time now, but then you can weave these hands-on experiences, into your college years, winter break, spring break, summers, post-college. And these particular options can have you come away with a certification, but in a very short period of time, you really do get a lot of information fast. Yeah, there's a question in there. We'll take some questions at the end and definitely cover those. All right, so third category, urban internships. So these are more independent. You do pay a fee for them, a couple $1,000, and then housing and food costs. They are well worth it for what you're getting. So this is what I saw in my stepdaughter and her job with IBM that came from an internship she did during her gap year at 19. So these can be 6 to 12 weeks. You're living in shared housing, often with fellow interns, so it gives you that built-in social life, I think, which is really helpful during gap time. And then you might be engaged in something automotive, you might be working for a business, you might be doing research, you might be helping to, at a refugee center, it could be volunteer type work. My daughter did one of these last year and she was working with a human rights lawyer in South Africa. So these can be places like Ireland, Spain, England, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Argentina, Costa Rica, depending. And they really are a great half step into the work world. There are 2 or 3 hybrid programs where it's like a facilitated group program. So you're with the same group of peers, start to finish for a semester, and more program wrapped around you, but everyone's doing internships during the day. And that could be in Israel, you have to be Jewish for those, or in the United States or in Europe, a couple of these more like group internship programs. Okay, next category. And the final one here are all the volunteer options, work experiences. So these are all over the world, all different lengths of time, all different ages, and are much more low cost, typically more rural than urban. And some will give you housing and food in exchange for labor. So I have a number of students right now who are coaching kids in sports, helping in the classrooms in Africa, living in an international volunteer group house, pretty low cost, and transportation, everything set up for them to do the service work every day. Or students might be working with animals, wild or domestic, or on board tall ships. Or there are group options like group volunteer programs where you could be clearing trails in national parks, housing and food for labor, or doing the disaster relief work. So you could help rebuild post-hurricane, earthquake, fire damage, US or abroad, for a week or longer. The work is basic, but it's good work. And again, students are learning a lot from these because they are more independent. Many students will wait and do these more in the winter to spring, but it doesn't mean you have to wait. Some students are happy to be more independent and start with something in the fall, especially if it gives them more of a group of volunteers. And these really drop the cost down big time. You can also work for part of a gap year or a whole gap year. The potential drawback to that is if you're home and everyone's gone, it can be kind of lonely and you're home, and we all can kind of regress when we're home. So at least part of a gap year, I usually say, try and do something off and away, maybe work for half of it and then head off and away. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Drew. So this just gives you a quick hit of what a sample year might look like. It doesn't have to follow this blueprint, but you see it pretty much follows a school calendar. So students tend to do their own thing in the summer after they graduate from high school, maybe work, help pay for the year, and then maybe start with more of a structured group program in the fall, come home for a break in between. This is where some students might apply, but more reapply to colleges. So if they change their mind, or maybe they didn't get in where they want to go, they have this second shot if they want to at reapplying. The ideal is you apply, get in, and ask for a deferral, and you don't have to think about it anymore during your senior year. And then the second part of a gap year, you can see it can be more independent. The internships, the skill-based intensives, the volunteer work woven together. Some people do 2 main things during a year. Some people do 4 or 5. I mean, because you could do something as short as like a 2-day writing workshop to a week-long wilderness survival skills course, to month by month. And then the following summer, again, often people are doing the work or maybe some free travel, which also you learn from when you have to think about what am I doing every moment and organizing that. That's what my daughter Leah did in May. She said, I'm not sure I could have done that as easily at the start of my gap year, but by the end of her gap year, she did everything. I didn't do anything. She set up all the flights to Europe, youth hostels she found. I went and met her for a week in Scotland, but basically I was just along for the ride, watching her do her thing. And it was impressive. So, yep, she can handle herself. Okay, next slide, please. So when do you want to start planning a good gap year? By spring of senior year, you can start earlier. And you really want to just start looking at core interests. Where in the world might I want to go? What are my general areas of interest? Anytime someone says to me, I've always wanted to go blah, 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 or I wanted to do blah, 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 that's the time to go check it out. This is the time, this gap time. And then you just start matching those options through fairs, through the online, anything you can find where these options are out there. If you want to work with a counselor, we all help people through this process. And talk to recent alumni, talk to parents of alumni. That's a good way to get good referrals. And also make sure you check with your colleges about deferral requirements. Colleges often will say, fine, take your gap year, but don't garner credit, because we want you to come in as a freshman. So you need to be careful about that. And sometimes scholarships or financial aid can't be deferred. They need to disperse it within that year. So you just need to ask. It's sort of college by college. And if you have medications or need any mental health supports, you want to make sure you've got all that in place. And then I mentioned the option of reapplying to college during a gap year. It's not a guarantee. However, colleges are going to see your full senior year. So if grades are level or up, that's a benefit, because often they don't even see much of your senior year anymore. And you can speak from half of your gap year on essays, and then you can describe what you're doing for the rest of the year. And they know it, the colleges know you're going to be a different kind of student. It's going to put you in a different bracket. So it can help. It won't hurt. Okay, next slide. I think we're almost at the end here. So the costs. So I mentioned parents sitting down with students and laying out a budget. The scholarships, financial aid that you can ask for with program providers, and also with gap year counselors. I mean, we'll always help people if they need help. So just don't hesitate to ask for help if you need it. I think someone had put in a question about 529 plan money or college money. You can actually use 529 plan money for accredited programs for the fee, but you may not get the credit because the colleges are not going to be happy to have you getting credit. So, but you could actually pull the funds in for some of those accredited gap year programs. Ask for money. Everybody lives vicariously through your gap year, so do your crowdfunding. Work to help pay for it. Even if you don't have to, I usually recommend students do. And as you saw, you can really do combinations. You might have a splurge program, and then the rest of the options are much more low cost or completely low cost for the whole time. Next slide, please. All right, so just a funny image. This is our Western lives up on top. We're very linear, very goal-oriented. This is our gap year plan, and life isn't like that. It's not that tidy. It's pretty messy. And when you look at the bottom there, what you've got there is the front loading of experiences on a gap year as a visual. It's the ups and the downs. It's rolling with change. It's the richness of life experience that you're garnering. And you're not a tourist. You're a traveler. It's different. Okay, I think we're at the last slide now. These are some helpful resources. So obviously the USA Gap Year fairs have been running for many years now. I've been speaking at them since they started. How many years now, Drew? I don't even remember here, but it's been a lot of years. And now they're run by Go Overseas. The Gap Year Association has been around for about 10 years, and they're vetting programs and gathering data on all things gap year in the US. So that's a nice resource. And then the Year Out group is the British version of the Gap Year Association. So they're vetting British programs. So if you're hunting around online and you come up with a program that's British run, can run it through the Year Out group. And then there are a number of us gap year counselors advisors in the US. I don't know if all of us do free gap year brainstorming sessions. We definitely do, just to educate people about the gap year. No obligation. People are crazy not to do a brainstorm with us, because we can really lay out a scenario based on the student's interests, like an overall sense of what is possible. So use these resources, and thank you all. I think we have a little time, unless Drew says we don't, for some questions at this point.
All right, thanks so much, Holly, for that fantastic presentation. You're making me want to take a gap year now. As Holly said, now is a great time to throw any questions you may have in the chat. And while you may be thinking of one, Holly, right off the cuff, I have a quick question that I hear up from time to time. And that is, what if my student doesn't want to go to college, or they don't feel like a year is enough, or adversely, a year is too long? How do we navigate those changes and making sure that they're prepared and ready to start back at college again?
So Sorry, I was looking at a couple of the questions there too. Just give me that in a nutshell again.
So what do we do if we're parents and my student does not want to start college after their gap year? And then we'll head on to some of these other questions that are starting to roll in now.
Yeah, I mean, I think not everybody wants to go to college. I mean, I had a young man who wanted to learn how to run a recording studio, and he got trained during his gap year and did an internship in a recording studio, and they hired him on. So he wasn't at all interested in going on to college. Generally, I find if people are thinking about college, it's really rare that a gap year will derail them from going to college. You're more likely to see people go from high school into college and then step away. I mean, the rate of attrition is like a third of college freshmen don't stay there. It's sort of like the dog catching the car. You know, I got the car now. What do I do with the car? So for gap year students, they often have a much clearer sense of this is why I want this college education, or maybe this is why I need it, or now I'm really excited about what I'm going to be studying, or maybe it's easier to be in college than in like the work world out there. I mean, there are lots of reasons why people get inspired, but I think I don't see that as much, certainly, you know, with the students with whom I work, and I work with a wide range of students and families.
Great, Holly. I'm also seeing in the chat here, Peggy wants to know, how is it best to ask for a deferral once you get into college?
So it's college by college, Peggy. You know, if you know which college, you just look on their website to see what their dates are. But normally you just ask for a deferral, and there could be information about how to go through that process. Some are really straightforward. Some might want a little more information. You can also ask your high school counselor about that. I'm not a college counselor, I know a little bit, but you definitely want to talk to people. But generally, the colleges themselves have information now about it. And if you know, once you get in, they usually give you about a month or so to decide about the deferral process. So the deferral is a little bit later. It gives you some time.
Thanks, Holly. Let's talk about gap time in the middle of college. I'm seeing two questions here. First of all, can a student take a gap year in the middle of college, from Sarah? And from Zach, if you do take a gap year in the middle of college, is it common to transfer to a different school when you go back?
It is often common that the students with whom I work, who are stepaways, as I call them, are often transferring. And I don't know what the exact percentage is. And then many are going back because they've realized, okay, it's not me, it's not the college, it's me. I think that's what sometimes students don't know. Is it, you know, are my issues or my frustrations or whatever it is that's making me want to step away from college? Is it me or is it the college? And the gap time can help clarify that. But I do see a number of students who'll transfer, and usually they need a full year under their belt. Somebody was asking about the 529 plan monies here, so that you can clarify, they can use 529 funds for programs that grant credit. But for colleges, if you're taking year before college, you may not be able to submit the credit because the college doesn't want you to, they want you to come in as a freshman. So if you suddenly become like a transfer status, you're going to lose freshman housing and all that. You don't want to get into that. So you want to make sure that you could do a program that's accredited, but don't try and submit the credit. Unless the college allows some credit, and that's college by college, you just have to ask them. Okay.
I'm also seeing a couple questions about next steps. Trevor wants to know if there's an avid interest in a gap year, where do we go for next steps? Benjamin wants to know how we sign up for a free brainstorming session. And I'm seeing Lori asking if there's any specific checklists to help a student recognize if they are ready for college.
Oh, okay. Well, with us, if you know, our website is up there. If you want to throw that in the chat there, True, that would be helpful. Thank you. Just hop on our website. We offer a free brainstorming session to anybody who's interested. That's for the student and one or both parents, and it runs about, you know, an hour and a half by Zoom. Just let me know you've already heard me present, because that's a lot of the information I present initially, and then the next part is the brainstorming. It's like, based on the student's interests, here's what's out there, and you know, here's what a year could look like. Here's that sample scenario laid out, potentially. Nothing set in stone. And there's no obligation to work with interim. I mean, you're going to walk away with more information. We don't name programs or give you all the details, but you're definitely going to have a better sense of what's possible. And it can really inspire students to want to do this, because sometimes students don't want to hear what their parents have to say. But, you know, in the best sense, I don't care what they do. My job is to say, hey, here's what's out there. These are well run, you know, look what you can do. The other thing I would say to parents is, if you have a child you think should take a gap year or is maybe not ready, I wouldn't use that as an argument, or it's not very compelling to be told you might need to take gap time to grow up. I mean, that's probably true, maybe. However, it's much more interesting for students to know these are the possibilities. This is what I'd be going toward, and not that there's a problem. Okay, what was the last question? There was one other one there. If a student, what was the last question? It was an interesting one you mentioned.
That was if there's a specific checklist.
Oh, a checklist to find out if a student should go to college, or to go to, you mean to go to college before or after taking a gap year? I missed on that one, sorry.
I think that this is a specific checklist to help a student recognize if they are ready for college.
If they're ready for college, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a checklist like that. I don't tend to work that way. I think since my whole thing is about choice, students know that there's college out there. What they often don't know is what gap year can offer. So when they have both, then they'll make a choice for themselves. Over the years of working with over 3,500 people at this point, what I see is that people choose well for themselves if they're given options. And I might have a student who comes in and says, Holly, this all sounds really interesting, and I choose college this fall. And for me, that's what's most important, because, you know, they're not just going to college, they're choosing college. So that ownership is what is really the core of this. And I would say trust your child. I don't know about the list, but, you know, obviously they might have a sense, and I think a lot of students don't even know what college has, what it's going to mean. That's why you get a lot of students who go to college and then they step away. Okay.
We're running short on time, so that's the exact one I was going to pick for our final question tonight.
And that's a great question. There's such a range of students who take gap time. Personally, I think for students who have ADHD, executive function issues, I'm pretty sure I would have been diagnosed with ADHD in high school. They weren't doing that at the time. But what I found on my gap year is it was so marvelous to have a year that was single pointed focus. Like I could hyper focus on things that I wanted to do one by one. So rather than all the stuff coming at me in school, some of which I wasn't that particularly interested in, it was great to have a break from that. And so it plays to a student's learning style if they can go towards something that they're interested in. All of those executive functioning issues. I was just chatting with a father today, and I said, who has ADHD, and he said, we're concerned that how he would handle gap time, and this has been an issue in school. He's not on meds. And I said, how does he do when he's doing something he wants to do? Does he get up on time? Does he, make it happen? And often the answer is yes. And the problem is we're seeing those students in the academic setting because that's all they've been doing. And so what you get with gap time is a chance to see somebody like that away from the academics, going toward the things that they're up for. Even if they're still disorganized, okay, that's what they have to learn. It's like, you know what, I left my keys, I got to get someone to help me. Maybe I lost my passport, but there's always a program of sorts wrapped around them so that they're not just, you don't just hurl them out into the blue, you're giving them landing pads. That's a very long-winded answer, sorry. Okay.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Holly, for all of those
you're welcome.
Fantastic answers in that presentation. And thank you all so much to our lovely participants and audience. Thank you so much for coming and spending your Thursday night, and we hope that this was helpful.